Over the years, Sony made some pretty unusual laptops. This one, though, is totally normal. Except for one small thing. The early 2000s saw the rise of a new class of laptops known as desktop replacements, where portability took a backseat to big displays and high performance. Sony was no stranger to these, with this VAIO NV200 from 2002 offering specifications that went above and beyond the typical portable PC. At first glance, this machine looks downright boring compared to some of the other laptops Sony had become famous or infamous for. The front edge features a memory stick slot because of course it did, and the left side holds a number of ports behind a flip-down door, including modem, Ethernet, 4-pin FireWire, and composite video output. Audio in and out are more conveniently located towards the front, along with a now quaint analog volume wheel. Around back is the rest of the connectivity. Power input, a generous 3 USB 1.1 ports, and serial, parallel, and VGA in a section that would normally have a door, except for it's gone missing on this machine. The NV series was also decently upgradable, with the hard drive accessible through a cover on the side and its 2 DDR RAM slots under a bottom panel, 512 megabytes in this case. As was common on laptops at the time, Wi-Fi was optional, and the empty slot means this one never got that upgrade. Battery life in these desktop replacement machines was not great, and while this lithium-ion pack offers 4,000 mAh of capacity, that would have maybe gotten you 2 hours of runtime. There's nothing special about this keyboard, but the touchpad does sport a signature VAIO feature of a physical scroll wheel with clever back button. This was in the halcyon days of surfing the web, after all. Sadly, while recovery disk images are available for a number of VAIO models, I haven't yet found one for the NV series, so I had to piece together a generic Windows XP installation from scratch. Once the machine boots to the desktop, you immediately notice Sony spent some money on this screen. It's a 15-inch panel that sports a resolution of 1400 by 1050, also known by the cumbersome acronym SXGA+. Driving that screen is a decent GPU, an ATI Mobility Radeon 7500 with 32 megabytes of DDR VRAM. It was the most powerful mobile graphics chipset when it launched at the end of 2001, and other manufacturers used it in their own flagship laptops. Technology, of course, moved fast during this time, and within a year, NVIDIA had an answer in the form of the GeForce 4 440 Go. But even then, the Radeon was still a solid choice. How solid? Let's find out. I kicked off a benchmark run in 3D Mark 2001 using the default settings, and in lower quality tests was seeing frame rates approaching 100 frames per second. In scenes at higher quality levels, it still hovered between 20 and 50 FPS and ultimately pulled a score of 3997. Unfortunately, the online 3D Mark score browser is long gone, and I don't have an offline database to dig through, but some researching online shows similar numbers from people with desktop GeForce 2 cards. Considering how mobile graphics tend to lag behind their desktop counterparts, this isn't too bad. For a more real-world example, I turned to my old standby Quake 3 Arena. I pushed the resolution up to 1280 by 1024, as SXGA Plus wasn't an option, and maxed out the detail, then fired up the demo. It performed really well. The demo was smooth and the graphics looked great, and the numbers didn't lie. 49 frames per second. Pretty good. What also helped is the CPU, a Pentium 4M running at 2 GHz. The only real oversight, which is kind of a head-scratcher given Sony's other product lines, is the sound card in this machine, a generic Intel AC97 chipset. But that also kind of speaks to what Sony really intended this computer for, along with the only magazine ad I could find for it. Not so much hardcore gaming, but general multimedia. And this little oddity in the photo brings us to what makes the NV series unique. In the Safely Remove Hardware icon down in the taskbar, it's possible to eject the floppy drive. And sure enough, there's a latch on the bottom you can slide to do exactly that. Now, having a modular drive bay on a laptop wasn't anything new at the time, but it was Sony's choice of alternatives that was weird. As shown in the ad, one could swap in a numeric keypad that's stowed away when not needed, or to help beef up the built-in speakers, a subwoofer module. And then there was this, model PCGA MDN1. Instead of floppies or perhaps zip disks, it accepted Sony's MiniDisc format and was part of its NetMD line. The drive was thicker than other modules, so the top label instructed the user to extend the laptop's spring-loaded feet in order to prop it up enough for it to fit. In order to use it, you had to launch the controversial Sonic Stage music management software. This was basically Sony's take on Apple's iTunes and let you import CDs to a variety of formats. It wasn't the most loved thing though, because it was comparatively clunky and slow, and also strongly enforced digital rights management. Later versions, like I installed on this machine, opened up a little bit by offering standard formats like MP3 and WAV, but by then its reputation had made it a pariah among music enthusiasts. But it was the tool you needed to use to take advantage of the MiniDisc drive. It supported the two long play modes known as LP2 and LP4, but also offered a standard play recording mode for backward compatibility with older MiniDisc hardware. You could also delete individual tracks or format the whole disc if needed. Copying music to a disc happened in two steps. First, Sonic Stage would convert the original file to a format that could be written to disk, then it would actually transfer the data. Thankfully, these steps could happen in parallel to make them go a bit quicker. The user interface in this later version of Sonic Stage also hints at another option, being able to copy music to the computer from an MD. Unfortunately, that capability was limited only to the last models of high MD hardware released in 2006. The software doesn't seem to be able to tell what devices support it though, because it let me try with this module. But since it's not compatible, after a few moments, the operation silently failed. For those less than enthusiastic about using Sonic Stage to manage their music, there was one respite: the companion MD Simple Burner app. This had its share of limitations though, in that it could only read from an optical drive, not files already on your computer, and couldn't write standard play MDs, so you were limited to playback on MDLP hardware or newer. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The software situation generally mars what's otherwise a decent experience. As a laptop, the VAIO NV series offered compelling hardware. If you were a college student, this machine could have been especially appealing with the optional built-in Wi-Fi and ability to hold its own at gaming. It was priced decently too, given how Sony tended to demand a premium for the VAIO line. A similar model, the NV170 with 1.6 GHz Pentium 4, sold for $2,200 in the middle of 2002. If you were already invested in the MiniDisc ecosystem, on paper this may have seemed like an obvious choice, but in reality, buying the MDN1 module made little sense. For about the same price, around $200 US, you could have bought a portable NetMD recorder, which came with USB interfaces and could do all the same things. Plus, of course, actually play music on the go. Faced with that, why bother with the VAIO at all when the competition had computers that did the same things for slightly cheaper? So unsurprisingly, the NV series wasn't the biggest seller, and the MDN1 was such a flop that Sony never tried making a MiniDisc drive for laptops again. Of course, this wasn't the only time Sony put MiniDisc in a computer in general. Several models of its VAIO desktops came with the drives, and they all had the same limitations. This concept never made the leap to the high MD format, which would have added the ability to actually use the media for data storage and not just music. But in some ways, it's a wonder this ever became a thing at all. Japanese companies, Sony included, tend to suffer from their internal groups being siloed, hampering cooperation even if it's in both teams' mutual interest. MiniDisc was part of Sony's consumer electronics group, which was different from the computing division. Yet somehow the two managed to work it out and release this quirky drive-by module. Still, it's an interesting part of MiniDisc's weird and wonderful history, and yet another reminder of the sometimes crazy small niches that Sony tried to cater to. Eventually, MiniDisc faded into obscurity as Sony turned to solid-state music players. But even if it wasn't the best product, the MDN1 exemplifies something that's arguably missing in technology these days. An attempt to try something neat and interesting despite little chance it would become a top seller. Sony made this simply because it could. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Here's another episode you should check out, and as always, thanks for watching.